Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and today we have a super interesting guest on, Tracey Djordjevic. Now, Tracey, you're the Director of Customer Service at Clarion Medical Technologies, and you've had a career in technology and a career then really mired with constant change. And that constant change has been a way that you've had to adapt a leadership style, how you've had to constantly educate yourself in order to not only properly position and manage your team, but be a leader within the organization. And I know that you're doing that right now. You've got a seat at the table. You're talking about the long-term growth and development of the business and what you're doing. That all plays into what we're talking about today, which is a strategic approach to leading change. And how do we do that starting from the contact center? Because we have more conversations with the customer than anyone else. We have the insights of the highest voice of authority in the business. So leading change, leading the organization, leading your team, all part of what you're doing and what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, I would love to just maybe turn it over to you for a minute and have you explain a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me on. I look forward to our conversation. Yeah, so I have been in customer service pretty much my whole entire career. And I've worked in a lot of organizations that were very growth driven because I've worked in the technology space in multiple organizations. So as you know, with technology, it's constantly changing. But thankfully, and I think it's been ingrained in my leadership style now, I am someone that embraces change. I think Tony Robbins once said, if you're not growing, you're dying, or any living thing. So I really have that kind of mentality myself. And I embrace change because I know it's necessary, and I know it's absolutely necessary for growth. So I think I've done a good job in my leadership roles to assist my team, support my team through multiple changes as they arise.
Well, I think the idea of change isn't just in technology companies, it's all over, right? I mean, the one thing that we know about our customers is that they're complex and constantly changing, which means for us, our business is complex and constantly changing. And you talked really eloquently about how there's a growth trap and that lots of times change happens so much that we're reactive. We're not planning, we're not strategic. And I just love to have you talk a little bit about that. And what do we do to address the growth trap?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, especially when they're in between phase, they might be small or medium, and they're really striving to get to that next level, or they're experiencing rapid growth that they can't keep up with. They get stuck in, as you mentioned, that trap. They get in kind of like a survivor mode. And then they tend to become a little bit complacent where they're relying on and leaning on that kind of historical behavior of, well, we've always done it this way. And because they're stretched by the growth, they're stretched within the organization, and lots of times that can mean resources or finances. There's people in the organization wearing multiple hats, and they're stretched on a daily basis. And that's what I mean by survival mode, that they're just trying to get through the things they got to get through in a day. And there's not time for planning or being strategic. And it becomes a lot more reactive environment than a proactive environment. So I think it's really finding ways to work within those constraints to allow time to really plan. But it's within the planning that's important. It's the proactive planning that really is going to set you up for the ability to execute. And if you're not doing that, I've seen it where it can be detrimental to companies.
And that planning, it can't be planning for planning's sake. There has to be a foundation underneath that planning that is where we're learning as an organization and making decisions that are very, very informed. And you have a real strong point of view that is shared by many of the world's largest consulting firms, but that the voice of the customer is the most important voice in the business. They're the highest voice of authority. They're the customer. Everything we do is to solve their challenges. And you, as the head of the contact center, you talk to more customers than anyone. Tell me a little bit about how you're learning to adapt to all the change in the understanding of the customer, but how does that start to fit in with the growth and the planning for the company itself?
Well, I think you have to start with your customer insights. You have to be gathering customer insights because you're right. Customers are the piece that's driving your business to grow, and you want to be meeting those customer needs as you're growing and adapting to their changes as well. But you need to be aware of those changes in order to adapt. So the first thing you need to be doing is making sure you're gathering customer insights. So then that can follow along with the next steps you need to do in your planning, which would be looking at building your customer persona, then building out that voice of the customer, doing your customer journey mapping, and all that needs to tie into your strategic planning. Customer centricity should be a key element of your strategic planning as an organization. And then you need all your other strategic objectives to tie into that from the bottom up. And I think you take a bottom up approach, but then it's got to be pushed from the top down, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So what I'm trying to do here is going to connect the dot, because a lot of the executives that are listening here are CX, customer support, contact center executives. And we often feel like we're a support department, that we don't have a seat at the table, that we have leadership that is looking at us as a cost center. So all the KPIs are around how do we contain. And what I'm hearing you talk about is how one of the pillars of growth in the company is customer centricity, and talking to the customer, the voice of the customer is where we get that. Those are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the importance of what we're doing. Because what we haven't yet talked about how we have to take care of tickets. We got to answer questions. We got to really make sure that the customer is taken care of and foster loyalty. And I want to get to that, but how did you and your company get a seat at the table and get the understanding of leadership to understand that you are much more than a cost center that just answers questions and keeps clients happy, that you are a source of insights that will drive the entire business?
I think one of the first things we did is actually revamp our KPIs. So we have KPIs that tie our activity and our resource hours to revenue. So if you build your KPIs in such a way, you're not going to look so much like a cost center. You're going to show that your team is actually a strong contributor to the revenue that the company is gaining. So I think you can start with that. And then as you gain your customer insights, you can also tie those into your KPIs. And then it helps you prove your return on investment, your ROI.
Can you give us some examples of some KPIs that are coming out of your group that are tied to revenue, and then the kind of conversation that you're having around those with leadership?
Yeah. So again, we tie all our activities that our CSRs do to resource hours. And then those resource hours are tied to revenue, or those activities are tied to the sales revenue, because we are supporting the sales organization. So if you're supporting a sales organization, it's pretty easy to do. Because of course, if your team is, for my team, they're entering orders, they're producing orders. That's a huge part of their activity and their transactions. So those orders are tied to revenue. Without those orders, the company would have no revenue. So that's one way that we tie those activities into the revenue. And we have what we call value add activities and non-value add activities. So we can also utilize that to create continuous improvement. So obviously the goal is to reduce some of those non-value add activities, so we have more time to focus on those value add activities.
Boy, if we could just underline, exclamation point, the non-value add activities, the value add activities that you're queuing up sales conversations. Because every time that you hear the voice of the customer, you're talking to them within your department, you're seeing opportunities for cross-sell, for upsell, as well as I'm sure every organization should be looking at their NRR, their net recurring revenue. So retaining customers is a revenue activity as well. Expanding customers is a revenue activity. That's what I'm hearing from you, and that you have a significant role in that within your department. Is that the right takeaway?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that we have done as well is we created a new role on my team that's inside sales for the purpose of focusing on, like you said, retaining our customers. Like inside sales is focusing on retaining customers as well as expanding our market share. So it's a multiple level touch point then when you have outside sales, inside sales, and customer service all working together to support the customer. Then we can advocate for a multi-level support system within our organization that's working for the customer. And it gives us a competitive advantage having that multi-layer and multiple touch points with the customer.
If you could, in kind of a basics 101 explanation, very intriguing, a defined titled sales role within your department. What is the specific role and how do they coordinate with the rest of the department?
The role's evolving, to be honest with you, because it's new. But we built it on the business model we thought would work best for the organization at this time. So something they're focusing on is dormant accounts, so win-backs, as well as small accounts, so they can grow that revenue. But they also are working on new accounts. So it's lead generation, reaching out to new customers and new potential and introducing our products. But it's also been a great way to expand the customer service department and provide opportunity for CSRs that might be interested in sales.
Yeah. And we all know that the culture and the career path that we provide for our agents is so important. So, boy, this is one of the most strategic conversations we've had on here. And I hope everybody's really, really listening, because sometimes it's hard. You've got to track things like CSAT and NPS scores. And our C-suite, they want to understand that. They want to know about that. But it's sometimes hard to tie like a CSAT to revenue or even an NPS score. Now, there are studies out there that say, hey, for every increase in an NPS score, it does have direct impact on revenue. But when you're talking to your C-suite, my impression is with all of the KPIs and the inside sales and the opportunities that you're taking, you're talking their language, right? You're talking the language of the C-suite, which is, how does this have a bottom line impact on our revenue and growth of our company? And we get very good at talking to our external customers, but I would say that your internal customers are the different departments in the C-suite and getting them to buy in.
Yes, I always say sometimes we need to train our customers, internal and external, how to do business with us. So with inside sales, we know there was a need for that. It fills a gap for outside sales of customers that they're not getting to or they don't have time to focus on. So that will always speak to the C-suite people because, of course, they want to maximize revenue where we might not be gaining it at this moment. So I think that was a really, really good way, like I said, to fill a gap. And fill a gap, we know too, it's meeting customers' needs, going back to the customer and being customer centric. Those customers are being neglected, and that's why they're not customers of ours anymore. That's why we're not growing revenue in their accounts, because they're not getting the attention. And we're hearing that, and we're utilizing that feedback to try to hone in on meeting those needs.
Meeting the needs of the customer centricity, voice of the customer. There's not an organization out there that wouldn't say, no, we're not customer focused. We're not customer driven. Everybody says that, but it's in execution. And I know that as a change agent, and you've talked so eloquently about how you're positioning your department and how you're helping the whole rest of the company. But lots of times we fail between saying we're customer focused and actually executing on it. And I'd love to just understand a little bit more about how are you ensuring not only your own department, but the company that you're actually executing on being a customer-centric organization.
Well, it's aligning everybody across the organization and having everybody in the organization understand the impact they have and their department has on the customer experience. So it's showing that through customer feedback, through customer journey mapping, through building the voice of the customer. If you don't show to other departments where the gaps are, like, of course, customer service teams are always customer focused. That's what we're there for. But that doesn't mean the accounting team or the purchasing team or the warehouse team necessarily is, because they're not dealing with the customer right in front of them like we are. They're not on the front lines. So it's aligning everybody in the organization to understand where their impact is on the customer and showing that by doing continuous improvement, that can improve the outcome and the end result to the customer, which then in turn obviously improves the whole customer experience, as well as really the improvement of customer experience should equal company growth and customer growth.
Yes. And in fact, you said another couple of things were really important there. Most customer support organizations don't even have direct meetings and direct conversations with the other different departments. Like customer support having a conversation with procurement, having a conversation with operations. But you're talking about doing two things. One, showing them where you can benefit what they're trying to do, their piece of the puzzle, by demonstrating where the gaps are. So I would just love to ask you, is there a story, take a procurement, take operations, take any different department, in terms of where you've been able to identify a gap, where you've been able to help them, where they're seeing customer support as an asset, somebody on their side that is ultimately together, we're helping the customer?
Yeah, I think you got to dig in and do root cause analysis. Another thing that's been helpful to us is to have project plans, because when you have a project plan and you're actually tracking, you can make certain departments accountable and you can collaborate and see where you're falling off on those projects or that continuous improvement. It holds the right people accountable and it keeps a tracking system in place where you can see, oh, that one's going off tracks. There's a red light there. We need to dig in and look into that. But I think also tracking customer escalations, doing a root cause analysis, and then engaging with the departments involved and collaborating again to see where can we improve a process or where can we fill this gap that happened and create a better result for the customer. But not only that, it will cut down on that department's processes, sometimes cut down on issues, create efficiencies to establish or show, oh, this part of the process isn't working. It's creating some friction. And if we jig this a little bit in this process, well, then you guys are going to have a smaller error rate. It's going to be less work for you to, say, in a warehouse situation, reship product to a customer. It's going to reduce costs because we're not having to ship something twice and backtrack on all those errors, not to even mention the resource consumption of someone having to do root cause analysis and go back and do all those things. So I think really it's the continuous improvement piece, getting that data again and making sure you are doing that, closing the loop on the feedback and gathering that data and actually doing something with it to make improvements, which in turn makes everybody's lives better, internally and externally.
Absolutely. Here's a big takeaway that I have here is that as an industry, we as customer support people, we don't always advocate for ourselves very well. And what you're doing here is you're taking the bull by the horns and you're saying, look, we have information that we know is going to impact this process, this gap. What you're trying to do is going to save you time, it's going to save you resources, and at the same time, it's going to be a better experience for our customer. You are the glue, the voice of the customer in between the customer and the different departments that don't interface with the customer. They don't have the perspective and the insights that you have. I am looking at where you're saying, and just as you brought in inside sales into your team, you are constantly a salesperson within your own organization in terms of how we can help you. There's not too many customer support people that think of themselves as a salesperson, have to have sales qualities. But how important is that to advocate for yourself in order to accomplish everything that you've been talking about here?
Yeah, I think it's key. If you're not advocating for yourself and your team, you're not going to get something you don't ask for. I think for me, I've had the benefit of doing sales myself. So I really understand the sales side and the sales cycle, which has always been to my benefit in my role on the customer service side and in supporting sales organizations. I've had lots of sales people and sales leadership say to me, it's really great that you understand that side of the business. So I never really looked at it that way, Steve, that I was doing that sales job as part of my role for advocating for things in the organization. But I guess it's true. That's really what I'm doing. But it really comes down to always being a person in a leadership role that feels the need to advocate for my people, which I think is essential to any leader.
Having your background in sales and customer support and a seat at the table with leadership, what are some of the things that you have learned from that? Like if you want to impart some wisdom to the audience, the CX leaders that are watching today, what's some of the most important things that you've learned that you'd want them to know?
I think a big part of it is to not be afraid to be honest and transparent, to speak up. I always say to my team, I can't help you if you don't tell me the truth. If you're not being honest or you're not telling me what's going on, I can't help you. Without that information, I'm lost. So I feel the same towards giving feedback to the organization. If you're not asking for help or you're not giving honest feedback, nothing's going to change and you're not going to be able to influence any of the decisions. So I think that's the most important piece, is to be honest and transparent and don't be afraid to provide that valuable input. I think people are afraid there's some sort of risk in that. But I also think if you're in an organization where you're at risk to speak your truth, you might not be in the right place.
Well, I have one last question that I want to ask. As humans, we can only retain about 2 or 3 things at a time. And we've talked about so much great information here today. If there was one thing that you wanted to leave the audience with, say, if there's one thing to take away from this whole entire conversation, I want you to take away this. What would that be?
I would say be proactive, have a plan, keep yourself accountable. One of the best things project planning's done for me is to hold myself accountable and keep me on track, because we all know things get busy and we have so much on our plates. Like you said, we can only keep 2 or 3 things front of mind. So it's very easy to put things off that you need to complete or procrastinate or decide this isn't a priority and kind of ignore things. If you have a plan in place, it doesn't allow you to do so. It forces you to be executing on those things, prioritizing what's important and staying on track. And that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned at this point in my career that has been of value to me.
Absolute words of wisdom there. Here's one thing I do know. especially with your sales background, the new KPIs, the inside sales, how you have a seat at the table. People are going to have questions for you. Is it okay if we give out a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out?
Absolutely. Yes, for sure.
Well, the mission of this entire podcast is to bring on different CX support executives that have different points of view, different insights, different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of creating change inside of their organization. And if we do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I just want to say you were an amazing rising tide today. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel honored that I was asked to be on, and I'm glad to be a part of something like this, and also absolutely lend out any expertise I have to anybody out there in need. I like to help and support other people in their success as well.